Namaste everyone. Thank you for joining in this class on Kala Sarpa. This is going to be a recorded class, as I informed in the group, due to certain reasons. And why do I have the background picture of Aries? Because a lot of things are happening in Aries as we speak. Okay. So before we begin, let's start with the Shanti mantra from the Upanishads. Om Sahana Bhavatu, Sahano Bhunakatu, Saha Viryankara Vavahai, Tejasvinadaditamastu Ma Vidavishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Okay. So in the last class, we looked up Rahu in the 9th house and how it impacts you psychologically as well as in other factors. So today we will be looking at Ketu in the 3rd. Okay. So the 3rd house rules the hands and upper limbs, the lungs and the hearing. And with Ketu's presence, the 3rd house, can create problems in these areas of the body. Okay. And if Ketu has other malefic influences, then it can also affect your hearing. It can also affect your lungs. And Ketu is a dead zone, so the native may experience some kind of numbness or stiffness or lack of nervous response in the hands. And he or she may be unable to get a grip of things, literally and figuratively. Now, if the 3rd house is well supported, like with the association or aspect of 3rd lord or benefics, then such a native may be able to tune in with the hands. Otherwise, for them, learning a new skill which involves the use of hands becomes extremely difficult. Okay. Now, Ketu's presence in the 3rd house, and if that 3rd house is aspected by benefics, then it produces careers like Reiki practitioners, message therapists, and other alternative healers who can diagnose or relieve a patient's, disease with the hands. Now, Ketu in the 3rd can also manifest as impairment or weakness in the upper limbs. So as a result, the native may suffer, bursitis or carpal tunnel syndrome, which is also known as CTS, frozen shoulder, and even tennis elbow. Okay, so we've seen how Sachin Tendulkar, who is of course India's greatest cricketer, he suffered tennis elbow, and that put him out of cricket for almost a year. And he was having a malefic transit of Ketu in the 3rd house. Okay, now when we age, hearing is one of the first things that gets deteriorated. Okay, but Ketu's presence can also make the native suffer with the practice of selective hearing. That means the native is not suffering any actual impairment, but he or she is practicing selective hearing. That means by tuning out things he or she does not want to hear. Okay. On the flip side, it creates a problem where someone hears what he or she wants to hear, but which actually no one said. Okay. And that is often mistaken as a case of possession or as a case of spirit telling you something, but it is not the case. If you have people with such a problem in the family, then see where the Ketu is placed. Okay. Most possibly it will be placed in the 3rd house. Right. Now, the 3rd house also rules siblings. Okay. So, the native may have no siblings or may have some kind of ambivalent relationship with them. For example, siblings may be physically absent or may have very little or no involvement in the life of the native, or siblings are too eccentric to be functionally helpful. Okay. So when it comes to having sibling relationships, the native may fail to communicate whatever he or she wants or needs, or may neglect to fulfill their appropriate role, and consequently such natives may be abandoned or cut off, or even let's say, I'm not getting the word, ostracized. Yes, ostracized by his cohort or by his siblings. Okay. Now, Ketu signifies confusion. Ketu also signifies absence of desire as well as surrender. So this may not augur well for the native siblings. Okay. Physical illnesses, substance abuse, or even lack of moral direction can impair their ability to play a functional role in the society. As a result, such natives, they may become wanderers, restless in domicile and relationships alike, and having no clear direction of where they ought to be. Just knowing that, they aren't content or fit to participate in the normal round of life activities. Okay. Now, Ketu in the third house, the third house is also the house of communication, right? So, Ketu in the third house makes the native very ambivalent about making announcement or delivering messages or handling communications or making plans or coordinating activities. Okay. And these people may have excellent writing skills, but while writing, they may experience complications in getting their written article or maybe their written thing published or disseminated via mass media. Okay. And such a native may suffer from a problem where the vocabulary or choice of language in speech or writing may be subject to double meanings or misinterpretation or even accusations of outright falsehood or even plagiarism. Okay. Such a native may have irregular daily mental activity like an interrupted train of thought or disjointed thinking or forgetfulness or illogical arguments, difficulty in making decisions, as well as confused inner dialogue. And as a result, such a native may have difficulty with normal communications. Okay. And if this Mars aspects Ketu in the third, then mental activity may be further agitated, but with a very, inconsistent and very vacillating type of focus. Okay. Now, the third house is also the house of logic. So, if Ketu is there in the third house, then the logic is flawed. Okay. And as a result, the native will be prone to misunderstandings and as well as coming to erroneous conclusions. Okay. And intuition or gut feelings may play a huge role in this decision making process. And consequently, the decisions of the native may seem to be very erratic with little grounding in the facts. Okay. And these people, they have very less idea about the facts that most people relied upon to inform their choices. Okay. Now, Ketu is also unstructured as well as uninhabited, right? So, in the third house, its presence may release the native from normal strictures of communication. And that can pave the way, on the positive side, that can pave the way for automatic writing and bouts of inspiration, which is very conducive for writing confessionals or fantasy or poetry or spiritual topics. Okay. And we know that Ketu is a Chayagraha. So this can signify a ghostwriter who performs writing jobs for someone who lacks those skills. Okay. Now, if Ketu's dispositor is linked to Jupiter or the ninth house, then it may open the door to writing for publications or for magazines. Okay. Now, Ketu in the third also reflects apathy for the normal functions of the mind. Okay. It can reflect some amount of, disillusionment with normal functions. So it can indicate a facility for meditation. So what happens is such a native can readily disengage from his or her normal mental chatter in order to communicate with his higher spirit. Okay. So this is about Ketu in the third house. Let us take a few example charts to drive whatever we have learned. Okay, let me share the screen. Okay, so this is visible. So this is Aleister Crowley. So I really wanted to take up Aleister Crowley's chart because we are looking at Ketu in the third, which is also a lot related to the occult. Okay, so Aleister Crowley, he was born on the 12th of October, 1875, and he passed away in December 1947. He was an English occultist. He was also a ceremonial magician, a poet, a painter, a novelist, as well as a mountaineer. Okay, even I have a few books of his in my library, right? And he founded the religion of Thelema, and he adopted the role of a 20th century prophet to guide humanity into the Aeon of Horus. Okay, and he has been a prolific writer. He was a prolific writer, rather, and he has published a lot of materials over the course of his life. And his most significant work being Magic in Theory and Practice. Now, this by magic, I don't mean magic which involves sleight of hands. I mean magic that involves communication with the supernatural. Okay. Now, he was born into a wealthy family that made its fortune by selling beer. And Crowley was sent to an evangelical Christian boarding school before attending Cambridge, where he majored in chess, poetry, and fornication. Okay. He was nicknamed as the Beast by his own mother, and later on, he was called by the press as the wickedest man in the world, largely on the reputation of his drug addiction and profligate sex life. Okay. And he made a very infamous comment which attracted a lot of fury in those days. He said that women like to be objectified. Okay. Now, Crowley was initiated into the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn at the age of 23, after which his destiny was set. Okay, so that is the reason I lay a lot of stress upon initiations. It can completely change, or it can set you up on your destiny. Okay, and he moved from one secret society to another, creating others along the way and attracting a weird coterie of followers. Okay, and his magical ceremonies often involved heavy drug use, like the use of cocaine and heroin, and ritualistic coupling with partners of either sex, sometimes with with sodomistic elements. Okay, so he married twice and he had 2 children, one of whom died in infancy, and he traveled widely. And he was very much interested in mountain climbing, and he became, later on in life, he became something of a method spiritualist, where he embraced the elements of Buddhism, Hinduism, the Kabbalistic tradition of the Jews, Muslim, and Taoist beliefs and practices, depending on whichever country he went or whichever country he performed his arts. But he always returned to Europe. No matter wherever he went, he always returned to Europe. And this happened because London and Paris and Berlin, it offered communities of like-minded devotees of magic and debauchery. Okay. Now, throughout his life, he spent money twice as fast as he earned it, and he died in relative poverty of acute bronchitis. But he, left behind a reputation as the best equipped magician to emerge since the 17th century. Okay, so his work has had a lot of profound influence on me during my earlier days as a magus, but that was before I met my Guruji, and he told me, the stuff that no one knew. But anyways, you look at the chart, you see Sun and Moon occupying the same signs as Rahu and Ketu. So they are lying within the nodal axis. So this is a partial Kala Sarpa. Okay. And since all the planets are moving towards Rahu, so it is a Anuloma type. And, this, of course, becomes the hotspot in the formation. And this is the starting point that we will look for the analysis. Okay. So Crowley, interestingly, he was born 2 days before a penumbral lunar eclipse. Okay, that means this is a time when a portion of the moon is shadowed by the earth. And consequently, both luminaries, both the sun and the moon, they are on the nodal axis. So they are arch enemies of the nodes, and this is a major dosha. Okay, so there is an aspect of triple strength, being in own sign, retrograde, and Digbala. Okay, so this aspect of Saturn on Rahu increases the dosha. Okay, and look at the Lagnesh. He was born in Purnima. So he was born in Purnima. So what happens? The Lagnesh is afflicted by the nodal axis, and the sun, as well as the aspect of Saturn, everything can potentially jeopardize the body and the mind. Okay. Now, the second Lord Sun is compromised by the shadow planets that contribute to substance abuse, and we know that Crowley's cocaine use was such that he required several nose operations in his lifetime to repair a damaged septum. Okay. And as the second Lord, this mutable sun also reflected his unsettled finances. Okay. Now, Crowley was born into Jupiter Dasha, Mars Antar Dasha. So Jupiter is ordinary in the 4th house, but it forms a Raja Yoga as well as a Dhana Yoga with a strong as Swagraha and Digbala Venus. Now Mars is exalted and forms Raj Yoga with Saturn in the 7th. Okay, and these powerful malefics aspecting his ascendant contributed to his being labeled as the wickedest man in the world. Okay, now look at Rahu's dispositor, which is Jupiter, and Ketu's dispositor is Mercury, and both are present in the 4th house with Venus. So Venus and Jupiter, they are the lords of morality houses, the 4th house and the 9th house. And Mercury is usually a problem for a Canceric rising person, and it replaces hedonistic behavior, Why? Because it rules the Kamasthana, which is the 3rd house, and the Moksha which is the 12th house, reflecting loss of self through desire. Okay. Now, as I said, Kala Sarpa has the power to promote any exaggerated and to promote the exaggerated effects of any, promote the effects of any exaggerated planets. And you see Crowley having 3 exaggerated planets: the full moon, the exalted Mars, and retrograde Saturn. So the moon is Lagnesh, while Mars and Saturn both aspect the Lagna, and that gives him a larger than life sinister persona. Okay. And the malefics, or having the Mool Trikona rulership of the 8th and the 10th house, explains in part Crowley's non-traditional career choice of magic and occult work. Okay. So 2 malefics in the 7th house also account for his obsession with sexual coupling as a means to achieve his magical ends. Okay. Now look at the 3 planets, Sun, Venus, and Saturn. They are all occupying nakshatras ruled by Mars. So for a third of all these bhuktis, these period lords will, invoke the effects of their nakshatra lord Mars. Okay. And look at Mars in the 7th house. This Mars is in mutual sambandha with Saturn. So they are associated with the same sign. Mars disposits Saturn by nakshatra, and Saturn disposits Mars by sign. So, there is a very antagonistic nature associated with these 2 planets. Okay. And that antagonistic nature found expression in his sex rituals that often involve sodomy. Okay. And many of the important events in the life of Crowley, it occurred in periods of the nodes, planets which are linked to the nodes, or even planets in exaggerated condition. Okay. Now, looking at the dashas, he, from the age of 3 to 22, he ran Saturn Mahadasha, and that saw his coming of age. That saw him coming of age both in education and sexual experience. In Saturn Venus, at the age of 11, his father died of tongue cancer, and Crowley inherited 30,000 British pounds. Okay. In Saturn Jupiter, he attended Cambridge, where he studied literature while indulging in his obsessions with chess and sex. And he had his first spiritual epiphany at the age of 21 while experiencing a same-sex encounter. Okay, so very interesting. Mercury Dasha ran from the age 22 to 39, and as a result, it made him travel extensively, from Mexico to India to Paris to Egypt to Nepal to China to Algeria and the USA. And in Mercury at the age of 23, he was initiated into a hermetic order of the Golden Dawn. And a year later, he purchased a Boleskine house in Scotland. Okay. In Mercury Venus, he got married. He honeymooned in Egypt, and there he began communicating with spirits. And his daughter, whose name was Lilith, she was born in Mercury Moon, only to die a year later. During Mercury Rahu, at the age of 34, he divorced. And in Mercury Saturn, at the age of 38, he undertook the Paris working in the winter of 1914, a 6-week ritual of sex and drugs to invoke Mercury and Jupiter. Okay. Now, Ketu Dasha, from the age of 39 to 46, saw him living in out in other countries. That means he lived in New York for 5 years, and he worked for Evangeline Adams, writing for Vanity Fair and taking multiple lovers. Okay. Venus Dasha, at the age of 46 to his death, saw both the highs and lows of his life. He lived and worked mostly in Sicily and Tunisia, but he had to keep going back and forth to London, Paris, and Berlin. During Venus, he was implicated in a scandal concerning his abbey of Thelema in Sicily, during which he was castigated by the press of the day and subsequently deported from Italy by Mussolini. Okay. In Venus Mars, he published his seminal work, Magic in Theory and Practice. In Venus Rahu, he married his second wife. Okay. And in Venus Saturn, at the age of 55, he declared himself to be bankrupt. And as I said in the very beginning, the rest of his life passed in relative poverty and obscurity, and he died in Sun Venus at the age of 72. Okay. So, next chart. So this is Marie Curie, right? This is Marie Curie. So Marie Curie, we know she was a Polish French physicist and a chemist who conducted pioneering research on radioactivity. And she was the first woman to receive a Nobel Prize, the first person and only woman to win it twice, and the only person to win a Nobel Prize in two sciences, physics and chemistry. Okay. And she was also the first female professor at the University of Paris and the first woman to be entombed on her own merits in the Pantheon in Paris. Okay. Marie Curie, she was the fifth child of parents who were teachers. Her sister and mother died before she was 10, after which she became an agnostic. And denied entry to a university as a woman, she attended an underground college to study math and science. At the age of 23, she moved from Poland to Paris, earned a degree in, physics and met her future husband. And they also shared a lab and collaborated on projects during which she identified two new elements, polonium and radium, coining the term radioactivity to describe radiation emitted by them. Okay. Now, as I said, she and her husband shared a Nobel Prize for physics in 1904, but then he died in a tragic traffic accident in 1906, leaving two daughters. Okay. Marie Curie, she won a second Nobel Prize for chemistry in 1911, but at the same time, she was vilified by the press for an affair with another professor, then hospitalized with depression and a kidney ailment. Okay. In World War I, she instituted mobile radiological units to treat soldiers who were wounded. Okay. And she was very non-materialistic. She never patented the process for isolating radium, relinquishing potential industrial applications in favor of science. Okay, she gave much of her Nobel Prize award money to friends, students, and researchers. And during the First World War, she even tried to donate her 2 gold Nobel medals to the war effort, but it was refused. Okay, she later died of anemia arising from her long-term exposure to radiation. Okay, look at the chart. Moon and Jupiter occupy the same sign as Ketu, but Moon lies outside the nodal axis. So this is a potential Kala Sarpa. And since the planets are moving towards Ketu, so Ketu becomes the starting point of analysis, and this is a Viloma type Kala Sarpa pattern. Okay. Now, this Kala Sarpa that Marie Curie has, it is a double-edged sword. Although Jupiter is on the nodal axis creating yoga, so Moon is also there, which creates dosha. Okay. But a powerful Mars aspects Ketu, while Saturn aspects Rahu, and their combined effect clearly makes this into a dosha category. Okay. Now, Curie was born into Jupiter Dasha, Mercury Bhukti. Jupiter is ordinary in the 3rd house, but forms Kesari Yoga with the Moon, and Mercury is ordinary in the 12th house, but participates in Pravarajya Yoga, whereas as a Kendra Lord with the Trine Lord Mars, it also forms 2 other Raja Yogas. Okay. Now, the association of Moon and Jupiter with this Ketu is problematic, not because these benefics are harmed by the nodes, but because Jupiter is Lagnesh and the Moon is the 8th Lord. Okay. So, unfortunately, Marie Curie's health and longevity were probably compromised by long-term exposure to radiation. And what is radiation? It's a phenomenon that is ruled by the nodes. Okay. Now, Rahu's Rashi dispositor is the Sun, debilitated in the 11th house, also stabilized by Jupiter's aspect. Ketu's dispositor, Saturn, is more problematic because it is in Graha Yuddha with the 6th Lord Venus in the 12th house. Okay. But nevertheless, Venus and Saturn as money lords each form Dhana Yoga with final Lord Mars, giving her, financial security despite her cavalier attitude towards money. Okay. Now, Pravarajya Yoga in the 12th house is symptomatic of her life. Emigration from Poland to France, a lifetime dedicated to research, total disregard for her own physical or financial well-being, and the tragic loss of her husband, especially since, 7th Lord Mercury and Karaka Venus are both afflicted in the 12th house. Okay. Now, the 3 planets, Sun, Moon, and Saturn, you see, they occupy a Jupiter nakshatra, while the other planets, Mars, Mercury, and Venus, occupy Saturn nakshatra. So, during the bhuktis of these 6 long periods, roughly 2/3 of any dasha, the effects of the 2 star laws, that means Mars and Saturn, they are invoked. Okay, and the themes of the 3rd house occupied by Jupiter, ruled by Saturn predominantly, including loss of, mother and homeland, and especially a career in physics. Okay, so we know that Kala Sarpa amplifies the effects of exaggerated planets, of which Curie has 3. That means Sun is debilitated, while Venus and Saturn are mutually damaged by their planetary war. And most of the key events in the life of Marie Curie, it occupied during the periods of the nodes, planets linked to the nodes, or even planets in exaggerated condition. Okay, Jupiter Dasha ran from birth till age 10, and with 4th Lord being in the 3rd, both her sister and her mother tied in Jupiter Rahu, which was around 1876, 1878. Okay, now Saturn Dasha at the age of 10 to 29 were years of struggle and transition. And during Saturn Mercury, that means between 1881 to 1884, she suffered depression and was forced to attend an underground university in order to get a science education. Okay, and in Saturn Mars period at the age of 23, she moved to Paris. During Saturn Rahu, she received degrees in both physics and chemistry, and during her studies, she met Pierre Curie, whom she married in Saturn Jupiter. Okay, the Mercury Dasha at the age of 29 to 46 saw the highlights of her career and, ironically, the depths of her professional life. And look at the 10th Lord Mercury, it is forming a Raj Yoga with the 5th Lord Mars. But that same Mercury is also the 7th Lord with 12th Lord Mars. So, this is a complex nature of both karma and its mirror. All right. And in Mercury, she discovered polonium and radium. And during Mercury Ketu, in her early 30s, she initiated 32 scientific papers that were published over the next few years. Okay. In Mercury Venus, she received her PhD in physics. And in Mercury Sun, at the age of 36, she won the Nobel Prize for Physics. In Mercury Moon, her second daughter was born. During Mercury Mars, her husband Pierre was tragically killed in a traffic accident. And the following year, the University of Paris awarded her its chair of physics. Okay. In Mercury Jupiter at the age of 42, she isolated radium for the first time, and she was awarded the Nobel Prize for Chemistry, the following year. And exposed in an affair with a married professor, she was vilified by the press at that time. Okay, during those days. Now, Ketu Dasha ran from the age of 46 to 53, during which, the period of World War I interfered with some of her scientific work. Okay. Now, nonetheless, she introduced mobile radiography units to treat wounded troops, and she tried to donate her Nobel Prize medals or gold medals to help finance the war effort, but it was refused. Okay. Venus Dasha, from the age of 53 to her death, saw her become a role model to women of science everywhere, even as her health began to deteriorate. During Venus at the age of 53, she toured the USA, and 3 years later, she was nominated to the French Academy of Medicine. In Venus Rahu, at the age of 61, she toured the USA, South America, and Europe. She died at the age of 66 in Venus Saturn, the conjoined periods of planets in Graha Yuddha. Okay, so this was my analysis of of Kala Sarpa in the 9-3 axis. That means Rahu in the 9th and Ketu in the 3rd. Do let me know in the comment section if you have any questions, because if you do, I'll be very glad to answer them. Okay, so that's it from me in this video. Kindly subscribe to the channel, like the content, and share with your friends and family if you find it useful. I'll see you in the Jyotish Foundation class. Namaste. Om Gurave Namaha.